I'm a jazz musician. Jazz is my passion. JAZZistry came about because I realized I couldn't expect to hold the attention of young people unless they knew what to listen to. I knew I could teach jazz. I knew I could make it relevant to them. In 1994, I set these ideas into motion. By 1997, I had named it JAZZistry. It works. It works not only because we perform, but we tell a story. It's the story of our American history. Not just mine, not just yours, but all of ours. JAZZistry is a history lesson, a geography lesson, and a music lesson combined. For example, we do this when we play a work song to demonstrate how African slaves used the call and response tradition. With our PowerPoint presentation, we use a map to show how we trace this tradition from West Africa to the New World. Then, we talk about how the tradition evolved. By 1871, the spirituals were popularized by a group, the Jubilee Singers of Fisk University. In remembrance of that group, we would like to play an old spiritual for you.
Throughout JAZZistry, the music is explained by the historical events that shaped it. When Protestant hymns were taught to slaves in an effort to save their souls, a new musical form was created, spirituals, and the Jubilee Singers gave white America their first glimpse through spirituals of the lives of Black Americans.
Trinidad, West African traditions like ridicule songs gave us calypso. You might recognize this Harry Belafonte hit.
Yeah, Eddie Harris. Oh yeah, they call it Freedom Jazz Dance.
In JAZZistry, music is the hook. It's an invitation to young people to open up their minds, view their own history from a bigger perspective, and find their place in it. You haven't seen the animated faces of our audiences or felt the excitement that a live performance brings, but it's a guarantee. JAZZistry is unique. It's a unifying message about an American art treasure and a legacy for which we can all feel grateful.
And that concludes our program. And at this time, we usually open it up for questions.
Well, hello. My name's Linda Yawn, and I am a radio host of jazz for many years. This is a different way of presenting the program JAZZistry to you. And you notice I took off my face mask. Well, we're recording this during the COVID-19 period. And it's important that we continue to communicate the mission of JAZZistry with Vincent York, who I'll introduce to you in just a moment. Let me tell you where we are. We are in a jazz club in Ann Arbor. It is called the LLama. It's on Main Street. And we're so grateful to them for letting us have this space, yet to do some teaching. And we truly want to thank the LLama Jazz Club artistic director, Dave Sharp, who is also our video engineer. He's doing a great job for us, as you will see as you go through this JAZZistry presentation. So now, the man who is JAZZistry. This is Vincent York. Vincent York plays all of these instruments beautifully. Vincent York has an amazing story in jazz to tell, playing with the Duke Ellington Orchestra and studying at the University of Michigan and getting his master's degree there, and then on teaching. And now we're bringing it to the world through the magic of video, again, thanks to LLama. Vincent York, thank you for creating JAZZistry.
Oh, thank you, Linda, for being here to help me out with this and introduce it to many people.
Well, JAZZistry is really important. So before we get to hearing some of those instruments, let's hear the idea of JAZZistry itself. What's JAZZistry?
Well, JAZZistry came about after playing music. And who would have ever imagined that something like that could have happened? When I started out playing and listening to Charlie Parker, and found out that Charlie Parker listened to Lester Young, and Lester Young, who was a big star in the 30s, listened to Frankie Trumbauer in the later part of the 20s, and then Frankie Trumbauer listened to Louis Armstrong. I didn't know what to call it. I used to call it jazz history, but then I got a lot of help after JAZZistry became a nonprofit organization, and I got a lot of folks with great ideas to help me bring it all together. And after many people had seen what it was, they helped me to come to the conclusion that the name of the presentation would be Jazz plus History plus Artistry. And jazz plus history plus artistry equals JAZZistry.
So, Vincent, there is so much behind you personally in your story. So before we get to explaining about JAZZistry, let's talk about you, your dad, and even your grandmother. So, Vincent, the Tiny York story's got to come out.
So my family was a hard-working family, and my grandfather was a grove foreman, and he oversaw 2 large groves that if you stood at one end, you couldn't see to the other. And whenever I got a chance to go out and work with him, my job was to take a hoe. And I had to hoe a 10-foot diameter around each tree on both rows. And I had to do that until I get to the end. I just stopped looking at the end and just got started. So we worked really hard. My granddad was a hard worker, and And at the time, my dad, I mean, this is during the time my dad had become a landscaper. And so we would go out, and my job was cutting hedges and trimming plants. I got really good at that. I remember once my grandfather took me to his boss's place, and I had to cut these vines on the side of the house. And during the time, you know, in Florida, you know, he would say, "Yes, sir, yes, sir." Well, Mr. Young came out, and I didn't say yes, sir, and my grandfather scolded me. He said, "Look, if you can't say yes, sir, then I'm not going to bring you again to Mr. Young's place." I said, "Oh, cool." I didn't want to go there anyway. It was hard work.
Did you really want the life of the musician rather than the landscaper?
Well, I didn't know anything about being a musician at the time. I mean, kind of, but not really. You know, it was fun. I hadn't really grasped the idea that I would become a musician. But to end the story, my grandfather came up to me and he said, "Vincent," he said, "Mr. Young has asked me to bring you back." I said, I said, "Oh, really?"
Well, that brings up something very special because we're based in Ann Arbor, and so our experience is very different from yours. You grew up in the Jim Crow South.
Yes.
And that's a rare experience, and you're alive to tell the story.
You know, a lot of the things that would happen were, you know, kind of natural. They weren't so overt. I mean, Florida was very different from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and that I think it was because of the people retiring up north, coming down and settling in Florida. So the times were bad, and I do remember singing for colored only. And if my mom went to work, she would work in my grandfather's boss's house, and there was one family in Gifford, which was the black community, that had all the services. They had the bus service, so we would catch a bus to go to Vero Beach, and they also owned the big club in town, which was called Club Valley. Club Valley was a place that it was one of those places on what we call the Chitlin Circuit. And I mean, everybody who was anybody would stop in at the Club Valley. And I'm saying this now because I've learned it later. I didn't realize how famous this place was. And I was about probably 5 years old, and my brother was 6. And his memory of things were just a little sharper than mine. But he remembers one day my dad called us downstairs, and he wanted us to meet this man. He said, my brother's name is Tony, and Tony, Vincent, this is a good friend of mine. It's Mr. James Brown.
What? James Brown! James Brown! James Brown! You outlet because damn it, you wanna bang.
I didn't realize who he was.
Ain't you hip?
until we went back to where I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and we went to the Coliseum Theater. And when I saw him perform, I just could not believe it. I mean, he'd take the microphone and treat it like it was like he was dancing with a lady. He'd throw it down the floor and bring it back and said, "Come on back to me." And I thought that was just over the top.
What a great experience.
I was born in Jacksonville, and we moved back to where my mom was born, which is Vero Beach. And we would... we lived right next door to my grandmother. They had a restaurant called Step In. And on Fridays and Saturdays and Sunday afternoon, they would have matinees, they would have music. And all of these incredible musicians would come through. I mean, they were musicians, they sound different from anybody you would hear around that town. Said, "Hey, Vincent, come over here. Could you run to the store and get me and cop me up, this and that, and get you a couple of 2 for a penny cookies while you're at it." I said, "Oh my goodness, yeah." Well, later, I realized that some of these people were Louis Jordan, and I mean they made these instruments. I mean, they sound like they made them sound like they were so easy to play. When they played, they were so hip. They had these, some had beards and they had the cool look, and they were always walking, a certain style. Everybody had their own walk, and it was just really nice. I didn't know why I had such a different life, from the kids that I would see in school. And they had no idea that all of these things were going on. So people like Louis Jordan, who my brother was talking about, had come through. So when I finally did a tribute to Louis Jordan at the Ark here in Ann Arbor, I just thought, wow, those were some of the sounds that I heard, like Caledonia.
But Mama didn't know I was in love with Caledonia. So I'm going down to Caledonia's house and ask her just one more time. "Caledonia! Caledonia! What make your big head so hard?"
And it was incredible. When you're in the mix of something like this, you have no idea whatsoever, what's going on. You just think, wow, it's great. And I didn't realize that from experiencing all of this that my dad was probably one of my first idols. One day, this car comes to our house, and in the back of the car, they're like all of these saxophones, all different sizes, laying in the trunk on a velvet blanket. And I looked at them and I said, "I want that one." I saw one that was smaller than my dad's. My dad played tenor, and I said that would fit me just right there. He said, "No, we're not gonna buy these instruments." And I didn't understand it at the time until later. He said they were hot, and we couldn't buy those instruments.
So, Vincent, we've talked a lot about your experience with your grandfather and your mother, but we haven't really gotten around to Tiny York, your father, and your grandmother. So let's go there.
Oh, okay. Well, my dad was, he was always the musician. I'd see him practicing. And the one thing I admired about him is that no matter who it was, loved him. And I said, man, how do I get that gift? How can I do that? And I tried to model myself after him, but it was impossible. You know, watching him play, and I was very much unaware. He would tell us these stories, and these stories did not sound believable. One in particular was that he had a band in Jacksonville, where I was born, Jacksonville, Florida, and his band, there was a gentleman who played the piano and sang. His name was Ray Charles. And my brother and I, you know, we would laugh because all of his things were always over the top. And I thought, and we just thought, oh, Dad, he's you know, he's exaggerating. He's telling all of these things. We don't. Until one day, my brother and I were playing at the Fairmont Hotel in New Orleans, now in the Roosevelt, and Ray Charles came to town. We looked at each other. Hey, you want to go over and see if we can talk to Ray Charles and find out if Dad was telling the truth? And so we left, and we got over to where Ray Charles was in the dressing room. We were really surprised how quickly he invited us into his room. And he said, how you guys doing? How's your dad doing? And my brother and I kind of looked at each other and kind of said to ourselves, Dad was telling the truth. It's been an ongoing thing. He passed away in 1991. And a lot of the things that the questions that we had when he was alive, we didn't have them until we were older. And so we have since discovered that his name appears in about 4 books. There was the history of Jacksonville, which was called the Harlem of the South at the time. And there was this book that discography of Ray Charles, and some other things. So we later found out through the years that, you know, my dad's influence, his saxophone playing was modeled after Gene Ammons. And I was just coming home from school when we stopped in Jacksonville, and I stopped at my uncle's house. And he said, you want to hear the cat who your dad used to emulate? And yeah, who is that? And I said, hang on for a minute. So he puts it on, and it's Gene Ammons. He says, it's Jughead. So as soon as he put it on, I heard my dad. Oh. I said, oh my goodness, this makes sense now. So, and the other thing, my dad would sing. I always thought he had the voice of Billy Eckstine. He had the style. And when I started playing saxophone, he would bring me on all of his gigs. So I was in clubs and at house parties and all of that, playing my horn at 14. And it was really a different kind of life, because at the clubs I'd see my teachers, and they'd be having a ball, and we're out there, you know, and playing for them, and they're giving us encores after encores. You know, play that again. That was great. You know, a lot of people in my class of 1970 have no idea about the past that I came up in.
That's why we're doing this in JAZZistry, to just really tell your story. So, can you play a little bit of that tiny York sound, which also emulates the late, great Jug, Gene Ammons? And For those of you who don't know a little bit about Gene Ammons, you're going to learn a lot in JAZZistry. Gene Ammons was a great saxophonist from Chicago, and Gene Ammons' father was the amazing boogie woogie and blues piano player, Albert Ammons. So Gene Ammons also has an incredible family. And I think that's one of the things that as we go through JAZZistry, that you'll learn that family's really important in jazz. And here is a member of a great jazz family, Vincent York.
Red top. Well, that's how I heard it when I would listen to my dad play. And I didn't realize what an effect or how it affected me the rest of my life. But it did, and it stayed in me since I was that tall. Anyway, it was the beginning of my going back in time.
Did your father practice a lot at home?
He did, and you know, I don't know how my wife stands it. That I practice all the time, but we used to hear him practice all the time, and he used to, you know, go over the things over and over, and we'd say, "Oh man, come on, play something else."
But that's the point of practicing, to getting it down straight.
Yeah.
And I think as we talk more about jazz with our students and teachers, they'll understand that the jazz greats practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced so well that they could then do it, like almost absorbing it in your body and having it come through as a memory and yet sounding fresh at the same time.
We came from a hard-working family, and whatever you got, you had to work for it. So I had to work really hard. I had to go around to our neighbors' houses asking if we could cut their lawns, do whatever I could, wash the dishes until I got enough money I could buy an instrument.
You bought your own.
But it took a while because in 7th grade, I couldn't afford one, so I played on the first school instrument, which was a clarinet. And I went back in time, and I would play these songs, and I realized it was Benny Goodman. I was trying to sound like Benny Goodman when I would practice. And I thought, the clarinet was a little awkward for me. So by 8th grade, I saw this instrument. It looked like the clarinet, but it was different. And it didn't have the same kind of mouthpiece on it. It was an oboe. And I said, let me try that. So my band teacher, Mr. Trapp, gave me a double reed so that I could play the oboe, and I took it home. And for some reason, I liked the sound on the oboe much better than the clarinet. It was my first real introduction to classical music. And my favorite composer at the time was Mozart. I love Mozart. I don't know what it was about Mozart, but I just love hearing him play. And I would just practice oboe. And to this day, the sound of the oboe, I just, if there was enough time in the day, I would be a lot better at playing oboe. But I always loved the oboe, but it was my classical instrument. And I entered in school. I entered in the festivals, the contests, and I played oboe solos concert season, and really enjoyed the oboe.
Wow.
It was a while before I went back to clarinet. Ninth grade hit, and I thought, oh, man, but I want to play a saxophone. And so I started working and asking my neighbors if I could do their lawns and wash their dishes. And I finally earned enough money to buy my first saxophone. And it was an alto saxophone. The day finally arrived. I had my alto saxophone. It was laying out just as pretty and just as shiny, and I was getting ready to pick it up. And my dad and his friend were talking. He said, no, before you play the instrument, you got to hear the cat who made that instrument. And I said, oh, man, come on, man. I can do that a little later, right? I just want to blow a little bit. I just wanted to play. He said, no, don't play it. Hang on for a minute. I got someone I want you to listen to. And so he went home and he brought this 2-record set back. And it was of Charlie Parker. And I said, okay, wow, man, I had to wait this long. I was so anxious to play that. Just let me blow a note. He said, no, you need to hear the person who made the saxophone sound. And I put it on, and it was unbelievable. It hit me so hard in a way. As soon as they left the room, now at this point, I hadn't ever played a saxophone, but the fingers felt close enough because I had played clarinet initially, then oboe, so I just started playing. I put the record on, and oh my goodness, what I heard sounds like this. Or I fell in love with his blues. What was that? Here, I'll think of it later, but. Oh, it's just, anyway, I just wanted to play a little bit of, when I first heard him, it was so fast, I couldn't, it took me days, but I wouldn't leave that record player. I think for the first time that I heard him, I think I must have stayed at that record player for about 6 hours.
Wow.
And my mom had to come down and tell me, Vincent, you got to go to school in the morning. You better come on up and go to bed. And I said, okay, Mom.
Oh, Vincent, I'm going to pop in here for just a quick second. Do you realize that what we call centennial, the 100-year birthday of Charlie Parker is the 29th of August, 2020?
I did not know that.
So Charlie Parker was born in Kansas City, and that was the Kansas City Blues that you just played. And so he was born on the 29th of August, 1920. Wow. But what's so cool about Charlie Parker is that he continues to influence not only you, but if you talk to any saxophone player, they're going to tell you that Charlie Parker just lights up the room and lights up their life, and he continues to inspire. And you continue to inspire by keeping the Yardbird, Charlie Parker, flame alive.
Oh man, well, it kept me alive actually. When I go into schools, I often tell young people that Charlie Parker saved my life, and he did actually, because what was going on at the time, I was getting into trouble. I knew that I was very close to getting kicked out of school, and but things changed, and I got my, and I really call that my Charlie Parker, my first angel sent to me. He was my first angel, and next angel that was sent to me, it happened because of the dues that the people played in the civil rights movement. They allowed us to go to a white school. I was going to Gifford High School, and you could elect in Florida to go to Vero Beach High School. And I was one out of 7 people who elected to go.
There's a real difference between the Tiny York sound and the Charlie Parker sound, and then even the Vincent York sound. And that's one of the things that you try to discuss in your segments in JAZZistry, how a musician's sound can be so unique and individualistic.
Yes, I mean, each of us have a different voice, and when we pick up these instruments, we all sound different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just like the way we look, the way we talk, the things that we do, they're all different, even though they are much the same. I had graduated from Vero Beach High, and in the summer I didn't know what I was going to do, and I got this call from my friend, childhood buddy. His name was Johnny Lane. He was a drummer, and he went on to become professor at the University of Illinois. That was pretty much it. And then when he came home, he picked me up and whisked me off and back to Southern University. If that hadn't happened, my history would have never been the same.
Johnny Lane is important to you. And these relationships with Kathleen, your wife, that's important to you. Charlie Parker had very important relationships that brought him up when he was woodshedding, and that's a jazz term for practicing a lot, in Kansas City. So I think one of the questions, and it'll become very important as we go through JAZZistry, is that musicians listen to other musicians for inspiration and then take off from there. So who helped to shape Charlie Parker in his sound?
Well, it's funny that you asked that question. I asked my dad the same thing. And the story that was going around was that Charlie Parker had listened to Lester Young. And funny thing, that Oyamo, Charles Gordon, I did a play about Lester Young called Lady Lester. And he called me up and asked me if I would do the music for Lady Lester. Upon doing so, he then brought me everything that I needed to know about Lester Young. He brought me his 2 interviews. He brought me, a lot of the great recordings that, just recordings after recordings of Lester Young. And
what I did for the play Lady Lester, and it hadn't been done before, is that I transcribed Lester Young's solos. And we used them in the play for the first time. So I could sound like Lester Young.
What does Lester Young sound like to you today, Vincent?
Let's see. So Linda, I learned something when I was at Southern University. We were participating in one of those festivals, and in the festival, one of the judges was David Baker. And David Baker comes up to me after he had heard me play, and he said, "Hey, you sound a lot like Charlie Parker. I would like to send you my transcriptions." So he sent me these transcriptions, and I played them, and they didn't sound like Charlie Parker. I thought, oh my goodness, what is it? So I put them down for about 2 or 3 weeks. In 2 or 3 weeks, I picked them up and I said, I know, maybe I've got to go back to think about the way Charlie Parker played and add his personality to these notes. And when I did that, man, the solos that he had sent me, those transcriptions just opened up. And I got a chance to see for the first time what Charlie Parker looked like on page.
Wow. And you could feel it in your head and your heart.
What that did for me is that it made me go back to when I was at home playing Charlie Parker, take the album, and I went back and I transcribed each one of those solos on one side of the album.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And for JAZZistry students, when we say transcribe, that means listening to the music and then writing down the notes and the sharps and the flats and translating that ethereal thing, that magic of music, into black and white on note paper with stabs and everything, and then turning around and playing it. So here we go. Prez. That was his nickname that was given to him by Billie Holiday. And here's our very own Prez, Vincent York.
Oh, thank you. Man, I couldn't believe how different he sounded, and I could certainly agree with Billie Holiday. He was her favorite saxophonist.
Exactly.
So when I did Lady Lester for Oyamo, Charles Gordon, they also gave me 2 interviews of his. One was done here in the United States where he couldn't be himself, but when he was in France, he asked Francis Postif if he could be himself. He says, "I like to cuss a lot. Can I, is it okay?" He said, "Oh, sure, Lester, sure." And so he starts, and when he starts, he sounds like my dad. I said, "Oh my goodness." But it was just, I just couldn't believe how much I got to know about Lester Young. And on this one part, Francis asked him if he could, who did he listen to? And he said, I listened to this gentleman named Frankie Trumbauer, who was really popular at the late 20s. And he and Bix Beiderbecke played. And so, man, I said, okay. So I went back and I listened to Frankie Trumbauer, and I couldn't believe it. He sounded so different. But when you look at his solo written down and look at Lester Young's and look at Charlie Parker's, they all look like they came from the same person. But the way they played, it was just so different. Let's see if I can play just a little of.
Yeah, we would love to hear some of that Frankie Trumbauer sound because it is different than a modern approach to the saxophone. But that's one of the things that's so cool about JAZZistry is that we can make, through JAZZistry and understanding jazz's history in America, that we can make sense out of Frankie Trumbauer for the year 2020 and 2021 and beyond.
Oh, absolutely. Well, here's what he sounded like. I'll just play a little bit of him. I won't play the whole transcription. I'll play it.
But Charlie Parker and his alto saxophone and his technique and his passion and his effortless perfection, although we know that he practiced like the dickens to get there, was your inspiration. And that gave you a direction to clean up your act and to move forward and to take you where you've become today, a major jazz educator, a good father, now grandfather, and the founder of JAZZistry. And you're sharing your story and your experience so that you'll give the students of today a new direction and their own direction. And it maybe can be found for them in music, because music is a healing force.
When I heard Charlie Parker that day, my life changed. That was a change. When my trouble started, they started in the 6th grade. 7th grade, they got worse. 8th, they were just totally off the hook. And I could identify with, kids getting into fights and all of that. I had that almost at least once a week. And it was in a way, it was very bad. But once I heard Charlie Parker, it just instantly changed.
So, you want to share a little Charlie Parker with us?
Sure.